Mark had been my best friend since our freshman year of college. He was the kind of guy who always had your back, or at least, that was what I had believed for over a decade. Mark was charismatic, effortlessly charming, and possessed that sharp, calculated confidence that made him successful both in his corporate career and with women. He was tall, meticulously well-groomed, and always wore a signature, expensive silver watch that his father had given him, a watch he polished obsessively and never took off. My wife, Chloe, on the other hand, was gentle, deeply emotional, and valued security above everything else. We had been married for 4 happy years, or so I thought, until the pressure of my new business ventures started taking a heavy toll on our relationship. I was stressed, constantly exhausted, and increasingly distant. The cracks in our marriage began to show, but I never expected those cracks to become a gateway for the person I trusted most in the world. It all culminated on a rainy Tuesday evening. Chloe and I had the biggest argument of our entire marriage. It started over something completely trivial, a forgotten anniversary dinner, but it quickly snowballed into a shouting match about my late hours at the office and her feeling completely abandoned. In a fit of anger and frustration, I grabbed my coat, slammed the front door, and drove off into the night to clear my head at a local 24-hour diner. Deeply worried about Chloe but too proud to call her myself, I made a fateful mistake. I called Mark. I told him we had a massive fight, that I needed some space, and asked him if he could call Chloe just to check in on her and make sure she was doing okay. Mark's voice on the phone was calm, reassuring, and brotherly. He told me to calm down, take my time, and promised he would handle it. I felt a wave of relief, completely unaware that I had just handed him the keys to my life. I spent the next 2 nights sleeping on the couch at my office, trying to cool off and figure out how to fix my marriage. Chloe didn't text or call, which was unusual, but I assumed she was still furious with me. On the 3rd day, feeling a profound sense of guilt, I decided it was time to go home, apologize, and beg for her forgiveness. When I walked into our apartment, the atmosphere felt strangely heavy, almost clinical. Chloe was sitting on the living room sofa, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She accepted my apology with a quiet, hollow nod, but she wouldn't look me in the eyes. Her distance was chilling, but I attributed it to the lingering aftermath of our fight. Wanting to make things right, I volunteered to clean up the bedroom and change the bedsheets while she rested. I stripped the pillows, pulled off the duvet, and as I bent down to retrieve a dropped pillowcase from under the bed, my hand brushed against something cold, metallic, and solid. I pulled it out into the dim light of the bedroom. It was a heavy silver watch. Mark's watch. The very one he never took off. My heart stopped, blood rushing to my ears as the horrifying realization began to settle in. The silver watch felt like a block of ice in my palm. I stared at the engraved initials on the back, MV Mark Vance. There was absolutely no room for doubt. My mind raced through the timeline of the last 72 hours. I had called him, begged him to check on my wife, and he had come to our home under the guise of a loyal friend. I looked at the bed, then down at the watch, a sickening wave of nausea hitting me so hard I had to sit down on the mattress. The betrayal was suffocating. My best friend and my wife. The 2 people I would have taken a bullet for had torn my life apart while I was sleeping on a cramped office couch. I wanted to storm into the living room, throw the watch at Chloe's face, and demand answers. I wanted to drive to Mark's apartment and tear him apart. But as the initial shock began to morph into a cold, calculated rage, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. If I confronted them now, they would lie. Mark would claim he took it off while helping her wash dishes, or Chloe would swear nothing happened. They would gaslight me, make me feel crazy, and quickly cover their tracks. No, I couldn't react blindly. If I wanted the truth, I had to play this smart. I had to become a ghost in my own home. I slipped Mark's watch into my pocket, forced my facial expression back into a mask of exhaustion, and walked back into the living room. Chloe looked up, her eyes darting nervously to my hands, then to my face. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a weary smile. "Just tired. I'm going to take a quick shower." She nodded, visibly relieved, completely unaware that the man she thought she knew had just vanished, replaced by someone determined to uncover every single one of her secrets. While the shower water ran to create background noise, I took out my phone. I didn't call Mark. Instead, I opened an online electronics store and ordered 3 high-definition, wireless spy cameras disguised as ordinary household objects: a USB wall charger, a digital alarm clock, and a small Bluetooth speaker. I paid for same-day express delivery to my office. The next morning, I pretended to go to work as usual, but instead, I picked up the package, returned to the apartment complex while Chloe was out at her yoga class, and meticulously installed the cameras. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and the final one directly facing our bed. That evening, I decided to test the waters. I sat at the dinner table and casually brought up Mark. "Hey, have you spoken to Mark lately?" I asked, watching her face closely as I cut my steak. Chloe froze for a fraction of a second, her fork hovering in mid-air. "No," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Not since the night of our fight." "Why?" I shrugged, chewing slowly. "Oh, nothing. I tried calling him today, but he didn't pick up. Odd, usually he always answers my calls." Chloe swallowed hard, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe he's just busy with work," she muttered, staring down at her plate. The lie was so effortless it chilled me to the bone. Later that night, as Chloe slept soundly beside me, I opened the streaming app on my phone, connected to the hidden cameras, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 1:15 a.m., Chloe's phone on the nightstand lit up with a hidden notification, and my heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the screen through the lens. The glowing notification illuminated the dark bedroom for a brief moment, casting a pale light over Chloe's sleeping face. Through the hidden camera lens on my phone screen, I watched her stir, wake up, and immediately reach for her phone. She typed quickly, her face tense with anxiety. My phone buzzed silently in my palm. Because I had secretly set up a data mirror on our shared home network earlier that day, her messages were routing straight to my device. The texts were from an unsaved number, but I knew exactly who it was. "Is he still acting normal?" the message read. Chloe replied instantly, "Yes, but he asked about you at dinner. He said you aren't answering his calls." "Mark, I'm panicking. What if he finds out?" My breath hitched. Seeing the betrayal written out in black and white was a different kind of pain. Mark's reply came a minute later, "Calm down. He doesn't know anything. If he suspected us, he would have blown up by now. Just play the sweet, guilty wife who wants to fix the marriage. Keep him distracted. We only need a few more days." A few more days for what? The phrase echoed in my mind, chilly and ominous. This wasn't just a reckless affair born out of a moment of comfort. There was a timeline. There was a plan. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the silver watch heavy in my pocket, realizing that my wife and my best friend were orchestrating something far bigger than a simple betrayal of my trust. I forced myself to stay awake, monitoring the feed, but no more messages were sent that night. The next morning, I left for work early, making sure to loudly announce that I would be stuck in late-night budget meetings and wouldn't be home until past midnight. It was the perfect bait. I drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away from my apartment, opened my laptop, and kept the live security feeds running on my screen. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Chloe cleaned the apartment, watched some TV, and made a few phone calls. But at exactly 4 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the living room camera, I watched Chloe open the door. Mark stepped inside. He wasn't wearing his signature silver watch, and he looked around cautiously before closing the door behind him. Chloe immediately threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Mark held her, rubbing her back, but his eyes weren't filled with passion. He was looking around the room with a cold, calculating expression that sent a shiver down my spine. Did he suspect anything else? Mark asked, pulling back to look at her. "No," Chloe whispered, her voice coming through the spy camera's microphone crystal clear. "He thinks I'm just upset about our fight." Mark smiled, a sinister, triumphant smirk that erased every memory of the friend I thought I knew. "Good. The lawyer finalized the paperwork today. Since the business accounts are still under your joint name, once you sign the authorization tomorrow, the transfer will go through. By the time he realizes his company's capital is gone, it will be legally moved to our offshore account. He won't be able to touch us, and he won't have the money to fight you in a divorce court. I sat in my car, staring at the laptop screen, completely paralyzed. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she and my best friend were actively plotting to financially ruin me and steal everything I had built. Part 4. Hearing their words through my laptop speakers felt like a physical blow to the chest. The woman I had promised to protect and the man I had called my brother were casually discussing the total destruction of my life. It wasn't just about the watch under the bed anymore. The affair was simply the tool Mark used to manipulate Chloe, exploiting her insecurities to turn her against me and gain access to my company's finances. I took a deep, shaky breath, closing my eyes for a brief moment to control the trembling in my hands. I couldn't afford to break down. They wanted a war, and they had spent months planning it while I was completely blind. But now, the tables had turned. I had the truth, and more importantly, I had them on video. I watched the screen as Mark pulled a stack of legal documents from his leather briefcase and laid them out on our kitchen island. Chloe looked at the papers, her hand shaking slightly as she held a pen. "Mark, are you absolutely sure this won't bounce back on me?" she asked, her voice filled with a sudden wave of hesitation. Mark leaned in close, catching her chin with his hand, looking straight into her eyes with that practiced, manipulative charm. "Trust me, Chloe. Once the joint account capital is transferred to the new LLC under my name, it looks like a standard business investment. By the time he files for a corporate audit, we'll already be out of the country. You'll get the freedom you wanted, and we'll start over together." That was all I needed to hear. I closed my laptop, started my car, and drove straight to my corporate lawyer's office, a man named Robert who had been a close advisor to my father for decades. I didn't call ahead, I just burst into his office, looking pale and determined. Robert looked up from his desk, startled by my appearance, but before he could say a word, I opened my laptop and played the audio recording of Mark and Chloe from just 30 minutes ago. Robert's expression shifted from confusion to absolute gravity within seconds. He stared at the screen, adjusted his glasses, and slowly shook his head. "This is criminal conspiracy and corporate espionage," Robert said, his voice dropping into a harsh, professional tone. "They are attempting to drain your commercial assets through fraudulent authorization. If she signs those papers tomorrow, the bank will process the transfer automatically because her name is on the joint corporate charter." I leaned over his desk, my voice cold as ice. "How do we stop them without letting them know we know?" Robert smiled grimly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "We don't stop the transfer, Peter. We redirect it. We freeze the corporate joint account tonight under an emergency fraud alert, but we leave a dummy mirror account active. When she authorizes the transfer tomorrow, the funds won't go to Mark's offshore account. They will be routed into a secured escrow account held by the state court as evidence of grand larceny." I nodded, feeling a dark sense of satisfaction settling into my bones. The trap was set, and tomorrow, my best friend and my wife were going to walk right into it. Part 5. The next morning, I woke up early and played my part flawlessly. I kissed Chloe on the cheek, told her I had another grueling day at the office, and walked out the door. My heart was pounding, but my mind was entirely focused. By 10 a.m., Robert had successfully executed the emergency freeze on our joint corporate assets, setting up the digital trap exactly as planned. All I had to do now was wait for the clock to run out. I sat in my office, watching the live feed from the kitchen camera on my phone. At precisely 1 p.m., Mark arrived. He looked smug, adjusting his tie as Chloe handed him the signed authorization forms. "It's done," she whispered, her voice a mix of guilt and excitement. Mark grinned, pulling out his tablet to initiate the multi-million-dollar wire transfer to his offshore account. I watched his fingers tap the screen, finalizing the transaction. For a brief second, his screen flashed green, indicating a successful submission. Mark laughed out loud, throwing his arms around my wife. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully destroyed me. Little did they know that green flash was the digital signature that sealed their own fate, routing the stolen funds directly into a secured court escrow account as undeniable proof of grand larceny. At 6 p.m., I drove back to the apartment. I didn't rush. I walked up the stairs, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The living room was dark, but the kitchen light was on. Chloe was sitting at the counter, sipping a glass of wine. When she saw me, she forced a sweet, innocent smile. "Hey, sweetie. You're home early," she said smoothly. I didn't say a word. I walked over to the counter, pulled Mark's silver watch out of my pocket, and placed it gently right next to her wine glass. Chloe's smile instantly vanished. Her face turned completely pale, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she stared at the watch. "Peter. I can explain," she stammered, her voice trembling violently as she backed away from the counter. Before she could utter another lie, the front door behind me burst open. Two plainclothes police detectives, accompanied by Robert holding a stack of court orders, stepped into our apartment. Chloe gasped, looking between me and the officers in utter confusion. "Chloe Vance," one of the detectives stated coldly, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate espionage, and grand theft." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed with a text message from a colleague who was still at the office building downstairs. Mark had just been arrested in the lobby by federal agents while trying to board a flight out of the country. The courtroom was quiet as the judge reviewed the evidence. The hidden camera footage, the mirrored text messages, and the redirected wire transfer data left absolutely no room for a defense. Mark and Chloe sat at the defense table, refused to look at each other, their faces hollow and defeated. The grand plan they had spent months orchestrating had unraveled in less than 24 hours. Because of the overwhelming digital evidence, Mark was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate fraud and grand larceny. Chloe received a lighter sentence due to her lack of prior criminal history, but her reputation, her marriage, and her future were completely ruined. As for me, the betrayal left a deep scar, but it didn't break me. Thanks to Robert's quick legal maneuvering, my company's capital was safely returned to my private accounts within a week, completely untainted. I filed for an expedited divorce, ensuring Chloe didn't receive a single penny of alimony or assets due to the fraud clause in our state's marital laws. A month after the trial, I finally returned to the apartment to pack up the last of Chloe's belongings to be sent to her storage unit. As I cleared out the master bedroom, I looked under the bed one last time. There was nothing there but dust. I smiled to myself, feeling a profound sense of freedom wash over me. They had tried to catch me in a trap of betrayal, but by keeping my emotions in check and playing the game smarter, I had turned their own trap against them. I locked the front door of the empty apartment behind me, ready to start a brand new chapter of my life, knowing that true justice had been served.